The wind howled through the barren trees, carrying with it a chill that seeped into the bones of anyone unfortunate enough to be outside on a night like this. The small town of Black Hollow had always been a quiet place, nestled deep within the woods, far from the prying eyes of civilization. But tonight the silence was different, thick, heavy, and unnatural. Emma had always been drawn to the stories of the Skinwalker, a creature of Native American legend said to be able to shapeshift into any animal it desired. The elders of the town would whisper about it around campfires, warning the young to stay away from the woods after dark. But Emma, ever the skeptic, had always dismissed it as just another folktale meant to scare children into obedience. That was until tonight. She had been driving home from work, the dim glow of her headlights cutting through the fog that had rolled in unexpectedly. The road was empty as it always was at this hour, but something felt off. The air was too still, the forest too quiet. Even the usual chorus of crickets and owls had fallen silent. As she rounded a sharp bend in the road, her headlights caught something moving in the trees. At first she thought it was a deer, but as it stepped into the road, her blood ran cold. It was no deer. The creature stood on two legs, its body covered in matted fur that seemed to shift and writhe as if alive. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Emma slammed on the brakes, her heart pounding in her chest. The creature tilted its head, studying her with an intelligence that sent a shiver down her spine. For a moment they just stared at each other, the only sound the faint hum of the car's engine. Then it moved. In a blur of motion, the creature lunged at the car, its claws screeching against the metal as it tried to force its way inside. Emma screamed, slamming her foot on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, and the creature was thrown off, disappearing into the darkness. She didn't stop driving until she reached her house, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys to unlock the door. Once inside, she locked every door and window, her mind racing with what she had just witnessed. Was it really a skinwalker? Or had her mind been playing tricks on her? The rest of the night passed in a blur of paranoia and fear. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind made her jump. She tried to convince herself that it had just been a bear or a coyote, but deep down she knew better. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Emma finally allowed herself to relax. Maybe it had just been a nightmare, a figment of her imagination fueled by the stories she had heard as a child. But as she stepped outside to get the newspaper, her heart stopped. There, in the soft dirt of her front yard, were footprints. They were large, too large to be human, and they led right up to her doorstep. And then, as she stood there, frozen in fear, she heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the woods behind her house. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard before, a mix of animal and something else. Emma slowly turned around, her breath catching in her throat. The trees seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. And then, from within the darkness, two glowing yellow eyes appeared, staring directly at her. The creature stepped forward, its form shifting and changing with every step. One moment it was a wolf, the next a bear, and then something entirely unrecognizable. It was as if the creature was made of shadows, its body constantly shifting and writhing. Emma wanted to run, to scream, but she was rooted to the spot, her body refusing to obey her commands. The creature stopped just a few feet away from her, its head tilting to the side as if studying her. And then it spoke. Its voice was a harsh, guttural whisper, the words barely recognizable as English. "You should not have come back," it said, its voice sending a chill down her spine. Before Emma could respond, the creature lunged at her, its claws slashing through the air. She barely had time to react, diving to the side as the creature's claws missed her by inches. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest as she turned to run. But the creature was faster. It was on her in an instant, its claws digging into her shoulders as it dragged her to the ground. Emma screamed, thrashing against the creature's grip, but it was no use. The creature was too strong, its grip like iron. As the creature leaned in close, its hot breath on her face, Emma closed her eyes, waiting for the end. But instead of the pain she expected, she felt a strange warmth spreading through her body. It was as if the creature's touch was changing her, twisting her very essence. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the warmth was gone. Emma opened her eyes, but the creature was nowhere to be seen. She was alone, lying in the dirt of her front yard, the sun now fully risen. But something was wrong. As she stood up, she noticed that her hands were different. They were longer, more claw-like, and covered in a thin layer of fur. She stumbled to the mirror inside her house, her heart pounding in her chest as she saw her reflection. Her eyes were no longer her own. They were yellow, glowing with an unnatural light. And as she opened her mouth to scream, she saw that her teeth had become sharp and jagged. The transformation was complete. Emma had become the very thing she had feared. And as she stood there, staring at her reflection, she heard the voice again, whispering in her mind. "You are one of us now," it said. "There is no escape." Emma stumbled back from the mirror, her clawed hands trembling as they gripped the edges of the sink. The voice in her head was relentless, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to echo from the darkest corners of her mind. "You are one of us now." She shook her head, trying to clear the voice, but it only grew louder, more insistent. Her reflection stared back at her, a monstrous version of herself she no longer recognized. The fur on her arms bristled, and her yellow eyes glowed with an unnatural light. She could feel the change deep within her, a primal energy coursing through her veins, urging her to embrace the transformation. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But the evidence was undeniable. Her senses were heightened. She could hear the faint rustling of leaves outside, the distant scurrying of a mouse in the walls, the low hum of electricity in the air. The world around her was alive in a way it had never been before, and it terrified her. The voice in her head chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You cannot fight it. The change has already begun. You belong to the shadows now." Emma clenched her fists, her claws digging into her palms. She had to find a way to reverse this, to undo whatever the Skinwalker had done to her. But how? The legends she had dismissed as mere stories were now her only hope. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. The town of Black Hollow was eerily quiet as Emma made her way to the library. She kept her hood pulled low over her face, hiding her glowing eyes in the patches of fur that had begun to spread across her skin. The few people she passed on the street didn't seem to notice her, but she could feel their eyes on her, as if they sensed something was wrong. The library was an old, crumbling building at the edge of town, its shelves filled with dusty tomes and forgotten histories. Emma had spent countless hours here as a child, reading about the legends and myths of the area. Now she hoped those same books held the key to her salvation. She found a secluded corner and began pulling books off the shelves, flipping through pages filled with stories of skinwalkers, shapeshifters, and ancient curses. The more she read, the more her hope dwindled. The legends were vague, offering little in the way of solutions. Most of them ended with the same warning. Once the curse took hold, there was no escape. But Emma refused to give up. She couldn't. There had to be something, some way to break the curse. As she turned the page of an old leather-bound book, a passage caught her eye. It spoke of a ritual, a way to communicate with the spirits of the land and seek their guidance. The ritual required specific ingredients: a lock of hair from the cursed, a feather from a raven, and a piece of obsidian. It had to be performed under the light of a full moon, deep within the forest. Emma's heart raced as she read the instructions. This was it. This was her chance. That night, Emma gathered the items she needed and made her way into the woods. The full moon hung heavy in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the trees. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf. But Emma barely noticed. Her focus was on the task at hand. She found a clearing deep within the woods and began the ritual. She placed the lock of her hair, the raven's feather, and the piece of obsidian in a small circle of stones. Then she closed her eyes and began to chant the words she had read in the book. At first, nothing happened. The forest remained silent, the moon casting its cold light over the clearing. But then the air grew heavy, and a chill swept through the clearing. Emma opened her eyes and gasped. Standing before her was a figure, cloaked in shadows. Its form shifted and writhed, much like the skinwalker that had cursed her, but there was something different about it. It felt ancient, powerful, and not entirely malevolent. "Why have you summoned me?" the figure asked, its voice a deep, resonant echo. Emma swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I need your help. I've been cursed by a skinwalker. I need to know how to break the curse." The figure tilted its head, studying her with eyes that glowed like embers. "The curse of the skinwalker is not easily broken. It requires great sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Emma asked, her heart pounding. The figure stepped closer, its form shifting and changing with every step. "To break the curse, you must confront the skinwalker that cursed you. You must face it in its true form and defeat it. But be warned, the closer you get to defeating it, the more it will try to consume you. The line between hunter and prey is thin, and once crossed, there is no return." Emma nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes." The figure leaned in close, its voice dropping to a whisper. "Then go. The skinwalker awaits. But remember, the shadows are always watching." And with that, the figure dissolved into the night, leaving Emma alone in the clearing. Emma stood, her claws flexing at her sides. She could feel the curse growing stronger, the primal energy within her urging her to give in, to embrace the change. But she couldn't. Not yet. She had a mission now, a purpose. She turned and began to make her way deeper into the woods, following an instinct she didn't fully understand. The forest seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. But Emma pressed on, her glowing eyes scanning the trees for any sign of the skinwalker. And then she heard it, a low guttural growl coming from somewhere up ahead. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The growl grew louder, closer, until finally the creature stepped into view. It was the same skinwalker that had cursed her, its form shifting and writhing as it moved. Its yellow eyes locked onto hers, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "You should not have come back," it hissed, its voice a harsh, guttural whisper. Emma clenched her fists, her claws digging into her palms. "This ends tonight," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The skinwalker lunged at her, its claws slashing through the air. Emma dodged, her movements faster and more agile than they had ever been. She could feel the curse giving her strength, but she knew she couldn't rely on it. She had to stay in control. The battle was fierce, the forest echoing with the sounds of their struggle. The skinwalker was relentless, its form constantly shifting and changing, making it difficult to predict its movements. But Emma fought with everything she had, her determination driving her forward. As the fight wore on, Emma began to feel the curse creeping in, the primal energy threatening to consume her. She could feel herself changing, her body becoming more like the creature she was fighting. But she couldn't give in. Not yet. With a final desperate effort, Emma lunged at the skinwalker, her claws slashing through its shadowy form. The creature let out a deafening roar, its body writhing and twisting as it began to dissolve into the shadows. But as it disappeared, Emma felt a sharp pain in her chest. She looked down and saw that her hands were fully transformed, her body now more beast than human. The curse had taken hold. She fell to her knees, the forest spinning around her. The voice in her head returned, louder and more insistent than ever. "You are one of us now." Emma closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She had defeated the skinwalker, but at what cost? The curse had claimed her, and there was no going back. As the shadows closed in around her, Emma let out a final, mournful howl, her voice echoing through the forest. And then there was only silence. The forest fell still, the moonlight casting long shadows over the clearing where Emma had stood. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cawed, its cry piercing the night. And as the wind carried the sound away, a pair of glowing yellow eyes blinked open in the darkness, watching, waiting, hunting. The curse lived on.